I'm curious what your opinion is, and this would be just entirely your speculation. So I don't expect you to give me a solid answer on this, but there seems to be a sense, certainly within our community with this channel, that something is motivating the accelerated conversation about disclosure. Like this seems to be, well, the conversation seems to be accelerating. It seems to be picking up momentum, and it seems to be that something is pushing this forward. Some kind of Ross Coulthart, to use paraphrase him previously, he said something like a ticking clock. There's some kind of a ticking clock that's pushing this whole thing forward. Do you have that sense based on your reporting, or are we seeing something that may not be there? Is this just more in the media, so it looks like it's picking up speed?
No, it is picking up speed. There's very much consensus among the people I speak to that the Trump administration will be the administration that does push for transparency on the UAP topic. And I wouldn't be surprised as well should people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk would capitalize on this as well. I don't think Elon Musk really cares one way or the other about UAP topic, but if there is black technology there that is not publicly known, that will help what he sees as an avert an existential threat for humanity of staying here on the Earth and actually making humanity a multi-planetary species, he'll do it. So if there's black technology that exists that could help him in that mission, he's going to go for it, whether it's UAP related or not. And I think there is a close relationship there between Elon Musk and Peter Thiel there still. And if you look at the nominations within the Trump cabinet, we've got Mike Waltz. He was funded by Peter Thiel, and we've also got I can't remember the Vivek Ramaswamy, former
Hmm.
associate of Peter Thiel as well. And I think there's some others in there as well. I can't remember off the top of my no, but there are. I think yeah, and the vice president as well. So JD Vance.
Yeah.
He was actually losing his Senate race before Peter Thiel provided him lots of donations. And I think if you look at the UAP space, I think you'll probably find quite a few connections there as well. So it feels in a way that Peter Thiel has kind of like infiltrated US politics to the very top, but he's also kind of like infiltrated the UAP community as well to some extent. I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, you touch on a very interesting aspect of this whole thing, which seems to be recently coming more into the light. And I do you suspect? I think when we saw Carl Nell speak to the SALT group on Wall Street, and then there's been reports of some other more or less secret meetings that have kind of happened with various groups of investors. It is it appears from the outside, from somebody like myself looking in, that there is some kind of like alliance forming between the pro disclosure community and certain aspects of the commercial sector, I guess I'll say, or private companies that maybe exist outside of what we would consider the legacy program. Am I seeing something that's not really there, or do you think that is actually? It sounds like what you're saying is that may actually be happening, and there may be something to it motivating this forward.
I think you're right on target. Yeah, I don't think attempts ever stopped really from when Allsap tried to get the materials first by trying to set up its own SAP, and then by doing it via Department of Homeland Security. I don't think efforts really stopped. From my understanding, Lockheed Martin, through not just Dr. Jim Ryder, who was the vice president of Lockheed Martin Space Systems, but also Robert Weiss as well, who's one of the other vice presidents, were actually involved in trying to broker the deal to get them through to the Department of Homeland Security. As I've reported, there are allegations out there that was thwarted by Glenn Gaffney, who was the director of the CIA's director of science and technology at the time. But I also have reason to believe that the ultimate authority that would have been able to block that would have been someone above Glenn Gaffney, who would have been in position to do that. I won't name that individual yet. Obviously, if you're going to name someone in the CIA and put allegations upon them, you've got to think quite carefully about it. So, yeah, I don't think that ever stopped. There's a lot of money to be made, through this.
I want to ask you about the Glenn Gaffney thing because a couple of weeks ago we reported on it on this channel that a fellow journalist and host of the Good Trouble Show, Matthew Ford, put out a statement to Nancy Mace, and he did a video statement and a written statement as well, where he named, I believe it was Doug Wolf, former head of the Office of Global Access, Glenn Gaffney, head of the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, and I think it was Stephanie O'Sullivan as well. I may be wrong in that. Can you talk? I know that. How much of that story? That seems like a huge allegation. Like, that's an enormous thing for a journalist to say. How certain does one have to be in your line of work to come out with a statement like that? That seems like a very big thing to say, to put somebody's name on the map like that.
Sure. So you have to have multiple credible sources. So credible sources are sources that are in a position to know, have the right credentials, and have always had a history of providing you with correct information. So again, it's discretionary. Again, you're never able to 100. Well, actually, you're never able to 100% verify that information, as these are allegations, unless you do get a confession or verification for a document. So, a lot of people have been saying this for a very, very long time in terms of Glenn Gaffney, but for the last 2 years, no one's ever been able to actually say his name. So Matt and I have done that. And there's a bunch of other names connected as well. There's a reason why within one of my last articles I did name a lot of the directors and deputy directors of the Directorate of Science and Technology. So, previous people who held those positions, because they would have been people who would have been in the know in terms of the UAP technology, especially some of the stuff that was picked up in the 1950s, which did have historical ownership from the CIA. From understanding, that ownership now lies mostly within the DoD, the Department of Defense, and the CIA's kind of position as well in terms of recovery is that it kind of it coordinates the operations. So if it's underseas, it will be Director of Operations coordinating it with its naval branch, but that will be done coinciding with special operations within the DoD. And from my understanding as well, the Office of Naval Research, which is the main place, which is within the US Navy, which has the UFO brief, let's say. But it's different setups. When it comes to recovery missions, you've got something on the land that you have to recover. So who's best placed to do it? Okay, something at sea. Okay, you need a different kind of composition, and you need different kind of different specialities. But yeah, there's obviously been allegations as well that reported about subterranean recoverers as well. There's even been chatter about deorbiting UAP from space, and then recovering it from there. So yeah, I think this seems like very, very extensive, but it's also important as well to state that these recovery programs, they are legitimate recovery programs. Most of the time they're recovering Russian, Chinese stuff, or any other adversary. It just so happens that some missions are actually recovering things of unknown origin and potential non-human origin. So, that's why it's so dangerous when you're actually reporting on this stuff as well, touching upon really, really sensitive, legitimate programs.
Can you go into a little bit of an explanation about what is the office or the Directorate of Science and Technology's role in all of this? It's a very unique office, and they do some interesting things there. How do they fit into all of this?
Yeah, so historically, from my understanding, they had ownership of a lot of the things that were recovered in the 1950s at least. Um, uh, and it seems to be part of the go-between when it comes between the CIA and the DoD when it comes to these UAP reverse engineering programs and some of the recovery missions. Offers global access is involved as well when it comes to missions where you're going into hostile territory. Could be a mountainous territory, which is hard to get to, or it could be hostile as in kind of like Russian territory or something like that you're getting it from. So OGA is basically a delivery service. It isn't just retrieval missions. It's anything that you need to kind of like get into or take out of a hostile territory. They're your guys. So that's its role from my understanding. And it seems to me that the operations directorate has a major role to play as well, as does the weapons and counter proliferation mission center, which is, from my understanding, what I previously reported, had custody, partial custody of the Magenta craft that crashed in 1933 in Italy, which was subsequently recovered from Italy in the Second World War. And from my understanding on that, that craft was being reverse engineered by both Italian and German scientists and engineers, and basically that effort was transferred from Europe to Wright Field, as it was known at the time.
It literally sounds like an Indiana Jones movie. It,
Yeah, it's your discretion. You have to judge your sources. How legitimate are they? Is it credible information? Um, is it coming from credible people? And that's how you have to do it. You have to say, look, source A is telling me this. Check it through source B. Okay, does source C agree? You know,
mm.
and it's better if they don't know each other, if they're not having conversations with each other as well. That's even better. So you have to do your due diligence before reporting this stuff. It is incredible, absolutely. It's incredible allegations.
So somebody like Glenn Gaffney or someone occupying that position at the Directorate of Science and Technology, would that be the person who is making decisions on which bits and pieces of recovered technology get farmed out to what contractors?
So, from my understanding, the case of Allsap, when it was trying to get materials out of Lockheed Martin through the DHS, that was from a historic crash that it had custody over, and in essence, the conversation was that to Lockheed Martin was that we leased you this material. We're supposed to have it back decades ago. We can just take it back. It's not even yours to begin with to take it out. So we can just we can take it back from you. It's not yours to give away, basically. But it had custody of that particular material. And but like I said, from my understanding, it seems to be the Department of Defense, or an organization within the Department of Defense that now kind of owns the actual kind of like has custody of the actual material, whereas historical stuff at the time it may have been the CIA's director of science and technology. But yeah, I mean you'll have all sorts of sections. So the craft, DoD would be interested in the structure, the weapon systems. Department of Energy would be interested in the propulsion system. So yeah, it's in the CIA. The CIA will be interested in, the origin, who piloted the craft, intentions, motives, all that kind of stuff. So
I guess what I'm driving at is it seems like at a certain level there is an office or a group or someone in that is responsible for deciding which contractors get the goose that lays golden eggs, and they get to hand out like, here's the propulsion system, here's the navigation system, here's the metamaterials, here's all this. And in a sense that's choosing, like, these would are corporations that have access to technology that's ostensibly thousands or perhaps tens of thousands or even millions of years more advanced than their competition. So you've got, in one on one side you have this group that's deciding who the winners and losers are, who get to have that leapfrog technology first. And then it also feels like, and this goes back to something that we talked about a few minutes ago, that there is this other group. You mentioned Peter Thiel, Elon, groups that clearly have an interest in the commercialization of space and the colonization of the moon and Mars and the asteroid belt and beyond. It seems like there is a gold rush on, this is my own speculation, to get this technology and pry it loose from the legacy program and get it into the hands of other companies who can capitalize on it. You've mentioned that could be going on. Do you think, aside from that, there is something else that is, simmering in the background or underneath the surface that could be motivating this? That perhaps maybe NHI might be have something in store for us that we are not prepared for, and thus disclosure has to happen more quickly to get people ready for this. Do you have a sense of what might be going on there?
Yeah, and also I'd love Liberty's perspective as well. I heard him on his stream saying he was interested in the UAP topic. I can share something with him as well. He might find it interesting. In terms of non-human intelligence, it could be that there are from what I've heard is that it's multiple origination. There's multiple intelligences, different groups, and like humans, they don't always get along. There could be factions. You don't just say, "Oh, humanity's visiting our planet," as if it's like one group. No, you've got the Russians, you've got the Americans, the Chinese. They've all got different motives. So that's my understanding. But also, I think there are intelligences that are visiting as well, and craft that have come down that they don't know who the pilots were. They don't know who it came from, and it seems to be consciousness connected. There seems to be a level of spirituality involved, which is why you find highly esteemed people like Dr. Jim Ryder going to spirituality conferences about consciousness and talking about the electric universe. He's seen something. He's been exposed to something which has changed his outlook on life. Um, uh, I think that's really, really important to take into account. And I think there is also, a drive. There is an arms race behind the scene of who can kind of exploit the technology the most. And I think they do need more expertise. They need SpaceX and the best engineers they could possibly get to kind of help in an effort to reverse engineer and exploit these craft sooner than the Russians and the Chinese do. So I think it's in the best interest to actually open up these programs. And I think that was always, the goal in terms of what ORSAP wanted. And I think that's the goal of the modern kind of disclosure movement in terms of why they want this out. I think that's one of the big reasons, at least. But yeah, I'd also like, I'd love Liberty's kind of perspective on this. And I'd also mention as well, in terms of the Rendlesham incident, myself and one of my fellow journalists, we'd heard that General Williams, who I think was the wing commander or something like that of that, so Gordon Williams, made a deathbed confession about the Rendlesham incident. So he was above Charles Holt on the base. He had made a deathbed confession about what Rendlesham had heard to his son and his daughter. Um, and we actually managed to get in touch with the son. I messaged him on LinkedIn, and he was actually going to spill. He was going to tell us what the deathbed confession was, and we were due to meet him. And then all of a sudden, the guy gets spooked. Don't want to talk to you anymore. I'm not saying anything. I'm not turning up to your meeting. And myself and my fellow journalist from the Daily Mail, we showed up just hoping he would come to the Zoom call, but no, he never did, and he never got back in touch with us again. So,
why does this matter? It matters to me journalistically because I'm fascinated by the links that my friend and informant David Grush suggested to me in an interview last year with News Nation, where he pointed to the Vatican's alleged role in the purported transfer of non-human technology, an alien spacecraft no less. In 1933 it crashed in Magenta, was held by the fascists under Mussolini, seen by the Nazis, but eventually covertly handed over to the Americans, alleges David Grush, in about 1944. And this suggestion of a secret history with NHI technology, a knowledge of non-human intelligence by the Vatican. It certainly sits well with what you're saying about Pope Francis's interest in the subject.
Exactly. And look, you told me before that the Jesuits are very progressive, if the most progressive branch in the Catholic Church. All of them, or almost all of them, have PhDs. I know some of them personally. They are very good people. I know them very well, and they are very open about all this subject. And I can tell you something more because, for example, when David Grush said that Pope Pius XII helped the US with that object, okay, the main advisor of Pope Pius XII was a German Jesuit, and he was the head of the entity, the Vatican Intelligence Service at that time. I said that it was called the Holy Alliance, but in 1936, according to Spanish-Peruvian journalist Eric Frattini, the name of the Vatican Intelligence Service changed in 1936 to, the name was the entity. Until this day is the entity. Now, that main advisor of Pope Pius XII, that he was a Jesuit, a German Jesuit, he also was the head of the entity at that time. And he also had contacts with the FBI in the US and some agencies. So I see very easy that maybe it was through him, maybe, that Pope Francis helped the US to take that device to that country.
I also find it fascinating, and this is neither here nor there, but Jesus James Angleton, who went on to become the CIA's head of counterintelligence, as luck would have it, serendipity dictates he happened to be living and based for the OSS at the time, the American equivalent of the CIA at the time, in Milan, in northern Italy, very close to Magenta.
Exactly. And take into account this, because James Jesus Angleton, during Second World War and after that, he had intelligence contacts in the Vatican. Okay, during Second World War, because of Nazi Germany invading Europe. Okay, it was not because they liked each other very much, but was by convenience. Okay, because they had some enemies in common. And after that, they cooperated in Italy, James Jesus Angleton in Italy with Pope Pius XII after Second World War. And close to Magenta, and this German advisor of Pope Francis, I think that it's a very good possibility that that worked in that way.
I thought it was time I started addressing some of the questions that people have long been asking. So let's deal with some of those, the Q&As from our audience. The first one is from @ZSKI1. Do we know if these are high-tech military drones? And UAPs have flashing lights, and no one is questioning that, he makes the point. Absolutely right. Look, we've kind of addressed that already. We don't know if these are high-tech military drones. My sources are telling me they are. I don't necessarily believe them, and I think we should be skeptical. In one of the cases I've seen, you've seen a F-16 jet reportedly engaging with what looks like a luminous orb, and presumably the jet is operating at near supersonic speeds, and that orb was able to outstrip the speed of that jet considerably. Explain that, please, with known drone technology. One question that comes up next is from AUGGIED6760. One question that is not asked is who protects and conceals UFO and alien evidence? Who does this and who carries on with this suppression in successive generations? Who heads and operates this covert and secret organisation? Okay, let me be on the level here and say that if you'd asked me that question 3 or 4 years ago, I would have thought you were a raving lunatic, a tinfoil hat nutter. I now think your question is entirely reasonable, because I do believe that there is a cabal of individuals, and they are individuals. They're not departments or entities, they are individuals, carefully selected individuals, who believe that they are entrusted with a national secret and they're determined to keep it, even if it's operating illegally in defiance of the oversight rules of Congress. I think there are people in the US Air Force who know full well that we are being visited by a non-human intelligence. How do we explain the statement that was made by Dr. John Kozlowski, the new and very well spoken for incoming director of AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, who gave evidence to Congress in November, asserting that there is no evidence of extraterrestrial visitation to planet Earth? Well, I want to make the point. I think it's entirely possible that Dr. John Kozlowski is being lied to by people within the program who know full well what's going on. And I wouldn't be surprised if, since his November appearance, Dr. Kozlowski has been apprised of much more interesting information that perhaps has changed his perception. And it would be interesting to see him put under oath and questioned more rigorously by a Congress that is now more aggressively pursuing this subject with its bit between its teeth. I am told that there are individuals in the US Air Force who have been concealing this secret for years. It's largely driven out of the US Air Force because of the US Air Force's control of the subject since the 1940s, and indeed probably a lot earlier. Another thing I've learned very recently is that it is very, very likely that the US has had possession of non-human technology since even before 1941 Cape Girardeau, and possibly even before the Magenta object was retrieved by the Italians in the 1930s. I wouldn't be surprised if the US has had technology since the turn of last century. Go figure. But what has happened, I believe, is that there is a Presidential Executive Action Directive. I think they're called PEDS. Forgive me if I've got that acronym wrong. I really don't care. I'm sure there will be somebody who will pick me up on it. But for those of you who were following Michael Schellenberger's evidence in the Congress when he gave evidence under oath to the Congress in November, he referred to a program known as Immaculate Constellation, which, it is my understanding, is a very small part of a whole series of secret codename programs that constitute what we would call the legacy UAP program. But nonetheless, it's a very significant one. And I am now aware of who Mr. Schellenberger's source is. I realise now I was speaking to that source many, many months ago. I wish them the best. I will be protecting their confidentiality, but I can tell you, I can vouch for who they are, and I think the fact that they have come forward is extraordinarily significant. But anyway, just to make the point, when Schellenberger made the statements under oath to Congress that he believed that this Immaculate Constellation was a program that was protected by secrecy by the Defense Department, it was formally denied by the Pentagon that Immaculate Constellation is a special access program controlled by the Department of Defense. And you know what? The Pentagon's spokeswoman was telling the truth. And I suspect she knows full well what the real story is. And the real story, I am told, very, very reliably, is that there is a presidential order, action directive, whatever you want to call it, that was signed in or around 1954 by President Eisenhower that enshrined the secrecy of the legacy UAP retrieval and reverse engineering program. This has been kept a secret, even from Congress, in breach, by the way, of Article 1 of the US Constitution, which requires that Congress have oversight of everything it's paying for. This has been done in breach of those congressional oversight rules because of this somewhat lame and, I think, unsupportable presidential order since the 1950s. And I think that it's going to be a very interesting day of reckoning when Congress finally, if it ever does, develops the spine to ask the question of the White House, is there a presidential order which has essentially allowed this issue to be kept secret at White House level for many, many decades? And if that's the case, how do we justify that commanders-in-chief like Barack Obama, like Jimmy Carter, like Bill Clinton, notice they're all Democrats, asked the hard question, is there a secret UAP program? And they were told there wasn't. Certainly Obama was during his administration, and so was Clinton but they've found out differently subsequently. They know they were being lied to, and they were being lied to because of this ridiculous presidential executive order. On what basis, you would ask yourself, and I'd love a constitutional lawyer to answer this question, on what basis could a former president or a previous president lock in a lie to all futures commanders-in-chief to stop them from being briefed into this program? On what basis was that a good idea? Last time I checked, America is a democracy, nominally. On what basis could a commander-in-chief requesting information about the UAP legacy program be denied that information? And that's what I'm alleging happened and continues to happen. Presidents have been lied to. Congress has been lied to. That should be an issue for the American public. And by the way, the American public should be asking themselves, what about the JFK assassination? Is there a link between the UAP issue and JFK's murder by the national security state, which I'm in no doubt happened? I do not for one moment believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone assassin, and multiple sources in the intelligence community tell me I'm right. I think when we resolve the issue of UAPs, when we blow open the JFK files, I think we're going to solve both mysteries. At Beekneed, Bekneed, has Sheehan published, posted, shared, or otherwise made public the tracings he made from the crashed craft photos? It's been 45 years since he made the drawings. I'm wondering who else has seen them. Okay, so what he's referring to there is my friend and dear colleague Daniel Sheehan, a civil rights attorney of renown who heads the New Paradigm Institute out of Washington, D.C., which is a lobby group for UAP transparency that he works on with Jim Garrison and Tyler Zaradnik. And they're doing a sterling job exposing the UFO cover-up, which is a UFO cover-up. And what Danny's referring to there is a seminal incident which happened to him as a young lawyer. He had an association because of his background working with the Jesuits in the Vatican Church. He was known to the White House as somebody with connections to the Vatican. And because of that, perhaps, he was approached by a woman called Marcia Smith, who was with the Congressional Research Service, which had been tasked by President-elect Jimmy Carter to investigate the UAP phenomenon. It's a great story. I suggest you read about it in my book or watch one of Danny's interviews about it online, including the one I did with Danny many months ago. What you'll find is that Danny tells the story of how he was briefed into the fact that George Bush Sr., before he became president, when he was the director of the CIA, was apparently one of the gatekeepers of the legacy program secrets. And when Jimmy Carter, as president-elect, before he was inaugurated, was asking for a briefing on UAPs, he was formally refused a briefing by George Bush Sr. This isn't something that George Bush Sr. in his lifetime ever denied. It's never been denied by anybody. I've given plenty of people connected with him an opportunity to deny it. It's a fascinating story. Marcia Smith won't comment, but Danny Sheehan says that eventually he was approached by Marcia because of his work that he'd done with NASA, and he was asked to help her investigate the UAP phenomenon. He asked for access to the Blue Book files, the hidden Project Blue Book files, and incredibly, on a quiet Saturday morning, on a holiday weekend in America, he was told to go to an uncompleted office of the National Archives, or the Library of Congress, the Madison Building as it's now known, and there, in an uncompleted basement, he was met by men in black suits and given access to archives of microfiche. And when he searched those microfiche, in impatience, he started looking through the voluminous files for any kind of photograph. And what he saw was a photograph of a craft which had strange markings on the side. And although Danny hadn't been allowed to take in a pen and paper, he'd sneaked one in, and he surreptitiously traced those symbols onto the back of his shorthand pad and sneaked it out past the men in black. Now, incredibly and frustratingly, and I've badgered Danny to death about this, he lost the tracings. So the reason why he can't say what they mean after 45 plus years is because he just doesn't know. He's never been able to recover the tracings. But what is interesting is that when he did his recollection of those tracings, what he drew bore a very close resemblance to the symbols described by an airman called Jim Peniston, who said that this was what he saw on the side of a similar craft at the RAF Bentwaters base, Christmas 1980, which is another story entirely.
Now, I have a counterpart at Harvard. His name is Avi Loeb. And Avi was the chairman of astronomy at Harvard. That's a pretty significant position. Super smart guy. He had seen data for a interstellar meteor, meaning a meteor that, based on its trajectory, clearly came from outside of our solar system. And it moved in ways, he felt, as it was exiting our solar system, that said it was non-natural. And he proposed, didn't conclude, he just proposed that the way that it moved might be indicative of a mechanism, that it was made by somebody or something. It wasn't natural. Oh my God, he was absolutely, it was just the reaction from his colleagues was considerably bad. But luckily, he reacted to that kind of skepticism with the same kind of way that I did, which is this kind of righteous indignation. How dare you tell me that the question is off the table, or how dare you tell me that this speculation should not be allowed? The government has funded, and the public has funded, something called SETI,
Yes.
Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which is fine and good. But the problem with SETI is they're looking for stuff that's like
Really far away.
100 million light years away, and so you can never prove it.
Yeah.
So it's a very safe thing to do. But once you bring it a little closer to home, suddenly that's where people start going, oh, we're fine with it being over there because we once it's over there, we don't believe it can never be here. So
Now, I know, as a host, we always want to hear something amazing or something that you haven't shared before. What can you tell us about some actual things that you experienced or that you have seen? I heard that there are pieces of this alien spaceships that have been found, and I think there's someone that's collecting them. Is it, I don't know, it's Jacques Vallée or someone that?
Yeah, well, Jacques Vallée is a very well-known figure.
Hal Puthoff, I think he's the one that's collecting them, right?
Yeah, well, Hal and a lot of people are. Jacques, who I consider to be my mentor, lives in San Francisco. He's an astronomer. He's a venture capitalist. He's worked on some of the early AI, but he's been interested in the UFO field for a while, but again approaching it as a scientist. Because of his stature in the field, had been brought many objects that people claimed had been associated with sightings of UFOs. Most of them were sort of things that were left behind or had been dropped off of UFOs. So there's a recurring theme that you see associated with a lot of UFOs, several, not a lot. And that is the UFO is kind of sitting there, and suddenly, and this is seen at night, something appears to drop from the UFO. Or UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And one of the best documented events is what's called the Council Bluffs event. Council Bluffs, Iowa, it's nighttime, mid-evening. People see what looks like a UFO. I actually have a drawing of what one of the witnesses said that they saw. It's light, it's bright and flashing, and then something seems to drop off of it. And several groups converged because they thought maybe it was a plane that had crashed because there was an airport not too far away. And they found a big pool of molten metal, like 30, 40 pounds of it, in the middle of the winter on the ground near a pond, small lake. So the police show up, they take statements, they take pictures. I actually have the original Polaroids of the event, and people collected samples. And those samples were, quite a bit of early work was done on it by other scientists, and they had concluded that, well, first of all, there's no way to get that much metal there in a liquid form without some considerable effort, and then just dump it in the middle of a field, But if you dumped it in a field, that's different than something dropping it from the sky. So it was just basically concluded that it couldn't be, a helicopter that dropped molten metal, because there was no sound associated with it, and the people who were close enough said that there was no sound. It didn't have any prosaic, natural, easy explanations. So, it just sort of sat there. And Jacques had this and many other interesting pieces, and I said, okay, well, this one has the most science behind it. Let's replicate the science and see if there's anything new that we can do. And so the new thing that we did was we did a spatial analysis of the distribution of elements in the metal. And using one of the instruments that had been developed in my lab, the multiplex ion beam imager, which is a mass spectrometer that can look at metals. And so what we found was that it was a mixture, an uneven mixture of metals. So I explain it this way, that if you had three kinds of ice cream, strawberry, vanilla, and chocolate, and you let them melt in a cup or a bowl, and then you swirl it just a little bit, if you look here, maybe it's pure vanilla, but here it's a mixture of vanilla and chocolate, or chocolate and strawberry.
That's how they were mixed.
They were partially mixed, as opposed to if I put it in a blender, anywhere I look, it'll be the same, because I mixed it.
But other than that, it was normal.
It was normal metals, normal isotopes. Now, I actually got another piece of it just recently as part of a documentary, conveyed the same observation. But now I have three other metals from Australia, from nearby, as it turns out, and other places around the world where the same pattern of events occurs. Something is seen, it drops off this metal. The metals are different in each time. One of them is like aluminum. Another one is almost pure silicon. Pure to the level that you would need a Silicon Valley foundry to make.
Wow.
But it was dropped in the middle of a beach in Ubatuba. Pounds and pounds and pounds of it. Okay, why? So that was more the question. Is it from a UFO? It's why would an object drop these metals, and what does it mean about what the object is? Is it part of their propulsion? Again, just speculating. Is it part of their kitchen apparatus? Do they eat metals? I don't know. But analyzing it and then putting that information out, putting the data out, allows other people to think about it. Get it out there rather than just hoarding it.
Exactly, yeah. Could it be that, just a wild speculation, that all this AI that's growing so fast is actually driven by the aliens to enable us to be the same as them?
I don't know. I think artificial intelligence is just a straightforward outgrowth of the kinds of math that people do. Now, maybe they planted an idea in somebody's head and said, here's an equation that you dreamt about last night.
Right.
Maybe. I don't know.
And maybe the last question is about how aliens can travel. And if you don't mind, I'm going to show my little experiment here. So let's say we have a distance, we're traveling from New York to San Francisco. And it's a two-dimensional plane that these beings can travel. So they can only go this way, right? And this is not two-dimensional, but as close as we can get to it. So it would take whatever it takes, 2,500 miles to get from here to here. Now, if we had a way to curve space, and this is the easiest way to understand it, if we had a way to curve space and we did this, then the distance between San Francisco and New York would become, if I overlap the two axes, could be a foot or a meter or whatever you want it to be, if we had the ability to do that. Now, if we were able to curve three-dimensional space, and so basically you can get out of the space and then come back into into this space, you would achieve this fast travel that I think you have seen with the TikTok experiment or the.
Right.
Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, there's a physicist, a Mexican physicist by the name of Alcubierre, and he came up with a set of equations that showed with sufficient energy and sufficient negative energy, which we don't have, you could curve space. And the idea was you create, first of all, a bubble around yourself where you step out of the universe. We now have our own little sub-universe within which the craft operates. This is all theoretical. And then what you do is you create an incline in space where you basically say the forward part of the space is lower than the backwards part. And so what you end up doing is you end up moving through space without actually moving because you're in your own universe, but your bubble is moving. And it was published in a mainstream journal. People checked the equations and said, well, the equations make sense, but where are you going to get all the energy? I mean, what he calculated at the time was that you would have to blow up the sun, convert all of the energy of the matter in the sun into energy for every second of movement. Wow. So you basically have to eat the whole universe just to move. Wow. So anyway, I mean, it's what theorists do. They play with the math and they say, okay, well, yeah. But then other scientists came along and said, well, I can bring down the energy requirement to orders of magnitude, to a level where it's still not achievable, but now it's possible. And there are some scientists who have thoughts about how you might do it without even any of this kind of energy. So it points out the value of open discussion of your ideas, because he published it in a mainstream journal, showed his methods. He basically opened the eyes of other people who just want to play with ideas. And so that's the value of not stigmatizing an area of science or an area of inquiry. As long as it's not obviously aimed at something negative and you're not hurting anybody, the questions should be asked and the speculation should be on the table until you can take the speculation off the table, like we did with the Atacama mummy. So I remember talking to a physicist who is deeply involved with the program, meaning he actually knows a lot about, and he has top security clearances. And I said, so they're moving really fast and they're doing it in a way that they don't have an onboard fusion reactor. He said, well, we can't find their energy source. I said, so they're cheating somehow. I said, yeah, I mean, you can call it that. Somehow they're accessing levels of energy that are sufficient for them to make this move without exploding the sun every second. So I think one of the things that humanity is good at is, and that anybody in the intelligence field or frankly any field, commercialization knows, is that once you know something can be done, then it's a race to doing it yourself. If it can never be done, then
You give up on it.
you give up. But if you know it can be done, maybe that's all the incentive you need.
I think the Navy angle to all of this is extremely underrated. I think the Navy has experienced a lot of this stuff for a very long time. And one anecdote is, I did this show on this, mid-century inventor named Thomas Townsend Brown, who I'm fascinated with, because I think maybe he made some interesting updates in topological physics and the world of gravity that have not met the eye. And there's this story, actually, he's being written about by this historian, Paul Laviolette. And Townsend Brown goes to Hyman Rickover, who is the head of the nuclear navy. He basically started the American nuclear navy. And Hyman Rickover says, Townsend, stop wasting your time. Like, we've already figured this stuff out.
Oh, wow. Back then, too, huh?
Yeah. So, and then there's another guy named Robert Sarbacher, who David Grush mentions as having set up UFO secrecy along with Robert J. Oppenheimer at, the Atomic Energy Commission of 1954. And Sarbacher actually worked at the Harvard Undersea Observatory.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I think there's a lot going on underwater, and I think that the Navy's got to be, have experienced this stuff for a very long time would be my guess.
Yeah, that's interesting. Underwater world is interesting. They call them USOs or unidentified submerged objects,
Yep.
I believe. I'll just say from my experience talking to the guys on subs and whatnot, they're always very cagey, very secretive. But think about it, you don't have the type of like air traffic that you have. On our radar, we're always seeing all these different contacts, a lot of civilian air, but underwater, there's much less of that. And so if you're seeing something bizarre, it's probably a very high likelihood that it truly is bizarre versus some type of misinterpretation. And I know going back to, even, Columbus and even before that, most likely that they were, seeing things under the water that they didn't understand what they were. And I know Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who used to run NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, is highly interested in these underwater anomalies. I know he's working on pursuing that as a research topic.
Yeah, there's the little brother to the NRO, which is now public, so I can talk about it, but there's not much known about it, is NURO. And it's the underwater version of the NRO. And one gets the sense that, we've probably detected a lot of these things underwater. And do you think, per what you described as the kind of the observables of what you saw at Oceana, do you think these things have their own almost like inertial reference frames? Because one of the observables is they seem to be able to break conservation of momentum, right? Like you're flying Mach, 1 or 2 or whatever, and then you stop on a dime. And it's like, that's just impossible, like with a gas propulsion fighter jet. And so, and then plasma is also coming off the craft, which can reduce, G-force, inertial drag. And so do you think they've figured something out in that realm? Obviously, we're in extremely speculative territory here. But.
Yeah, no, I think it's a natural question, though, because based off of the flight mechanics, if you have something that's going supersonic or even 0.8 Mach or so, and you immediately stop it, it's no different than just slamming into the ground, right? In fact, it's probably a faster stop than if you were to crush an aircraft into the ground. So you have to ask yourself, how is it doing that? And I don't understand a physical mechanism that would allow it to do it without having to speculate about some type of ability to, control or manipulate inertia.
Yeah. And I think also unconstraining or opening up some of these like prior biases that we have, especially in physics. Carl Nell just did a great interview for Danny Sheehan's New Paradigm Institute. And he was talking about not only the preponderance of life in the universe and how, it's probably much older than we think it is, and, all sorts of things there, but also when it comes to physics, faster than light travel, Miguel Alcubierre figured out this sort of theoretical model, and NASA's been studying this for years. You have Sonny White at NASA, doing interesting work in this area. And it involves, I guess, negative mass or negative energy, but we actually detected negative energy, with the Casimir effect. And so there are all these ways in which if you talk to an average scientist at, any sort of university, they'll say these things are just impossible. And then you'll talk to like somebody doing interesting work at the frontier of R&D at aerospace. Yeah. Like I just met this former head of revolutionary tech at Skunk Works. And it's like, he agrees with all this kind of ostensibly wacky stuff that I believe way more than, any of these like prestigious professors. And it's this weird thing where it feels like aerospace has the real science and academia just doesn't.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. I agree with you. It seems kind of like a zero-sum game in academia where everyone's competing for the same grants. The standards are extremely high. And no one wants to screw with their career path so they can get tenure and then kind of settle into whatever they actually really want to do.
Yep.
But that's different than how the startup world works in the technology world. Guys they're pushing the edge of the boundaries, and the only limitations they have are their resources and what's capable. So I agree with you 100%. I think a lot of the real interesting work is happening out there. And that's why, again, I think it's such an interesting time now where that type of environment, this startup community that we have could be leveraged to be able to push this conversation forward. I don't think we can rely on academia to do that.
Absolutely. It would be awesome if young, talented STEM students watch content like this, and they get opened up to these frameworks, and they can work on things. And we were talking about it last night.
As important is the process of discovery, right? What can we do in the private sector? What can we do in the commercial world in order to bring forward capabilities, technology, and understanding that's going to allow us to decipher this without waiting for the government to throw us scraps, essentially. And so there's multiple organizations out there. Some of them are attacking it from a technology side. Can we potentially create technology that replicates some of the kinematics that we're seeing? If we can imagine, perhaps they have capabilities in the skin of their vehicle to generate power versus having that engine in the back. And so there are companies working on some very interesting energy and materials and propulsion technologies.
And before we wrap up, you mentioned something fascinating to me, which is, one of the central characters whose voice we all know from one of the 3 videos that the New York Times released in 2017 that the Pentagon admitted was real in 2020.
Yeah, on, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots to the west. The whole thing, dude. That's not LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's another thing, it's rotated.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll talk about it a little bit. So I mean, when I first saw the New York Times pop, massive deja vu. Right? I'm seeing this. What the heck? And it's like, my gosh, that's the video I saw in the classified space. My very good buddy, I'm not going to say his name, who recorded that video, and of course the pilot in the front seat as well. But this particular gentleman, he was at my wedding party.
Wow.
We went through training in Virginia when we first got on the F-18 together. We went to the boat for the first time at night together. We got sent to the same squadron after that together. And then as I was leaving that squadron, he actually put in a package to transfer from a weapons system officer, the backseat guy, to become a pilot. Then he got assigned to the same place I was instructing.
Wow.
So we spent most of those 11 years or so hanging out together. We were very good friends. And we got to talk just recently, and he actually shared something with me.
Which we should specify which video.
Yeah. But he shared something new on one of the now famous videos, in particular the Go Fast video.
That's one thing. Roger, got it! Roger, there's shooting up there. Are you box moving target? Yeah, dude. No, I took it on the track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at it fly!
And what this was that it wasn't just a singular object when they detected that. There were actually 4 objects that were in what we call line abreast, or basically a straight line about a mile apart, which, and flying formation that way, which, makes you think they have to be connected to each other in some sense digitally, right? They have to know where they are in relation to each other to be able to fly that precise of a formation. But, he's still very interested in this topic, at least in the context of his experiences. It's still something that he thinks about, and I think we'll be hearing some more from him.
Can't wait, and excited to see what you do too. And hopefully we can keep collabing. And thanks for coming out to Austin, Ryan, and coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, man.